Welcome everyone. Please take a seat, make yourself comfortable. Excellent. Our next speaker is Dylan Watson. He's going to talk to us today about releasing your inner DevOps. Dylan is a fan of cheap wine and fast deployments. He has spent the last 5 years improving the pace of development at Bank West and has recently started with Atlassian, building out their internal continuous deployment platform. When he's not building out the latest harebrained app idea, he is playing on the trampoline with his 2 kids. Welcome, Dylan.
All right, cool. Welcome, guys. So basically today I want to talk about how to build a culture of getting your code into production quickly, safely, and reliably. Okay. Thanks heaps to all our sponsors. Without them today, wouldn't be possible. Okay, so first I want to start off with a bit of audience participation. Everyone loves a bit of audience participation, I'm sure. Oh no. Okay. Try not to touch. Okay. So if everyone could put up their hand if your team has deployed something to production this year. We'll start ideally a low bar. So keep your hand up. Keep your hand up if your team deploys more often than every 6 months. Cool. All right. What about every month? Okay, few hands down, but still pretty good. Okay, every week. Does your team deploy every week? Yep, few less hands. What about every day? Yep, much less hands. And what about every commit? All right, cool. There's a few people. Awesome. For the rest of you, it's definitely possible, right? And today I'm going to show you a few techniques that you can use. Maybe not necessary to get there, but to improve your deployment process, okay? I'm Dylan Watson. I love building useful software and thinking about better ways to get it into the hands of our users. So first of all, I'm going to start off with some guiding principles, things to think about in improving your path to prod. A little case study, recent project I've been working on, and some practical techniques that you can use to move your code into users' hands quickly and safely. Hopefully there's time for questions at the end, so I am definitely keen to get into some discussion if you guys have got thoughts. There's going to be some controversial stuff ahead. You won't agree with everything, I'm sure, but that's cool. As I said, we can have a chat afterwards. I will be keen to have a discussion. So first off, deploying software safely, it can be hard. Hopefully that isn't the controversial bit. I'm sure we've all experienced pain in deploying software, but it doesn't have to be that way. So I'm sure that we've all got a time when we've had a painful deployment to prod, maybe a late night or something. So I want you to think about what makes deployments hard. Does anyone have anything that they think, like what makes a deployment hard? Anyone have any ideas? Feel free to shout out.
Doing it at 5 p.m. on a Friday.
Oh, yes. Late night deployments. Gotta love them. Anything else? Oh, testing? Yes, so manual testing is a huge one for sure. Yep. Anything else? Cabs, yes. Okay, so approvals and stuff like that, that's a huge one. So things I think about might be coordination between multiple teams, okay? Getting people to align is always really difficult. Scheduling out of hours deployments, I'd rather be at home with my family. Batching weeks and weeks of changes is super scary. You have no idea what you're sending into production, okay? Manual deployments, so any manual steps in your process to production really, that can make things really scary. They're likely to go wrong. You're going to mess something up, no matter how many times you've done it. And manual testing, discuss this as well. It's error prone. Okay, you want everything to be automated in your pipeline as much as possible. And once you actually get the thing into production, if something goes wrong and you can't roll back to a safe state easily, that's also really scary, right? So all these things build up this fear in our deployment process. Okay, on the other side of the coin, what makes deployments easy? Does anyone have any ideas? Sorry?
Small batch.
Yes, yeah. So less changes going into production, right? Things like having your code always ready to deploy. So you've actually made all the automated checks before you get to production, before you even merge your code. No approvals, no coordination. Yes, automated everything basically is probably going to be the pattern of this talk. But yeah, manual steps, testing, or approvals for sure. And you want to get to a point where your deployments rarely fail. But most of that is about practice and automation. So how do we do it? Okay, these are the things that I think are key when we're improving our deployment process. So first of all, we'll start off with, my talk's released here in a DevOps, right? So DevOps is really a mindset about automating or removing the steps in your process of deploying prod to production and being prepared to fail, right? So you're trying things out and experimenting with your deployment process and trying to just improve it. Back to fundamentals, basically what we're trying to do is write code, deploy it to production, get it into the hands of our users, right? That's ultimately what we're doing here. So we discussed before, small number of changes, less risk, right? So the smaller change that you make, you might have less risk of that failing, but also when it does fail, you know exactly what broke, right? You know that one little change that you made, that was the issue. You can roll it back, fix it. Okay, it's isolated. You should only merge when it's safe for production. So this is more of a, again, this is like a mindset thing. And in order to check that, we'll go through the techniques and stuff, but we want to merge and have all the automated safety and know that this thing is as safe as possible to go to production before you even merge that code. Testing is built into the pipeline. Okay, that's absolutely critical. So automated testing, and there's, I could do a whole nother talk about the types of testing, but testing has to be built into the pipeline. Same with security. Okay, so that's just another aspect that we have to consider when we're so this is like your code scanning or vulnerability checking. All this sort of stuff needs to be automated and will stop you from going to production if these things break. And lastly, once you actually get your code into production, you need to observe what's happening, right? You need to know, so this is like your logging, so logging or metrics and all this sort of stuff. You need to know exactly what's going on in production so that when things do break, you can easily track down the issue and that you know that something is broken in the first place. Okay, so I just want to chat a little bit about recent project I've been working on at Bank West. So this is a home loan system with, depending how you cut the numbers, about 20 different components, so APIs and apps, and around about 4 teams. So when we sort of started our DevOps journey, we were making about 5 deployments per month, okay, which is still not terrible, but there's also a few teams involved there. And we increased to 55 deployments per month at around about. So on a global scale, that's not a huge amount, but it made a big difference to us, right? That's an order of magnitude difference. So how do we do that, right? We were prepared to fail often, okay? Try things out. We would have the engineers in control of deployments, and our definition of done was in production. So, yeah, so experimenting and failing often, we made failure okay and even expected often when we're trying things out. And because of this, we tried lots of things. Failure was cheap, okay? But we also had the backing from our managers to push and improve and make these changes. And the expectation is that most of these experiments failed. But the ones that worked, they had a big impact. Okay. So I think probably the biggest one for me is that the engineers were in control of deployments. So when we started, the people doing deployments, the ops, were a totally different team, right? They sat over there, and you would say, "Oh, I want a deployment, please," and you'd have to schedule it in. And in order to alleviate a lot of the pressure, we brought that person in. So we brought one of those ops people into our team, okay? And that made a huge difference for us because it meant that all the people in the team, we had all the skills in the team to deploy our code to production. From there, that person trained the rest of the team, and we were able to work together, engineers, like dev and ops, to essentially automate our pipeline to production. To a point where anyone in the team could, just click a button. So, essentially what's pretty common now, the build it, you build it, you run it concept. And lastly, I think the fact that our definition of done is in production, right? So you can't close the ticket that you're working on until that thing is in the hands of your users. And I think maybe it's a guilt thing, but I think or even just a visibility thing. If you don't close that particular task until it's in production, it doesn't get forgotten about, and you know that when cards start to pile up, there's sort of you can feel it here that like you need to get that into production. That's a whole bunch of features that your users are missing out on. Okay, so now I want to share some techniques. I now want to share some techniques that help to deploy regularly and safely. So first of all, we want to separate our deployments and our releases. We want to use feature toggles and a little thing called expand, rollout, contract, which is a really great technique. Some of you probably have used it without knowing the name, but basically all these things are about taking a considered, measured approach, okay, to our deployments. So yeah, deployments and releases. So first of all, more audience participation. Who dreads deployments? I suspect anyone that deploys less often than a month probably is having these thoughts. Okay, and what about who dreads releases? Okay. Have a little think. Now, who thinks I asked the same question twice? That's valid. Okay, but basically, I'm here to basically separate those two concepts. Okay, so first of all, we'll start with some definitions. So deployments are basically, in my eyes, moving your code into a production environment. Okay, ideally there's zero downtime, so you're using some sort of deployment strategy like green, blue deploy or something like that. But ultimately there is no downtime in your system. And it should be a low risk to the business. It's a technical exercise. We're just moving some code into a production environment. Okay, and with automation, it should happen with minimal human interaction. It also shouldn't be affecting our users. Is a pretty critical one. There's zero downtime, but there shouldn't really be any impact to our users. On a release, on the other hand, now obviously we had some people that thought I was asking the same question. Deployments and releases. That's like they're pretty ambiguous terms. I think release is a pretty ambiguous term. It's used for all sorts of things. Generally, I'll probably use the word launch, right? So I'll go through in a sec. But a release or a launch is basically about launching new functionality to a user. And maybe you're only launching to some set of users, right? You're only activating the code for certain users. And the fact that we're separating deployments and releases allows us to prepare time for comms or train our users or let them know that something new is coming. Okay, it's not going to be like a new Facebook release and everyone goes, oh, it's totally changed. Okay, we don't want to end up in that situation. Okay, so who cares? Deployments, the team should care, right? The team doing the work is sending that code into production, and they care when things break. Okay, releases, we're trying to give the user new functionality, so the user should care. Okay, and I think that's what we should be thinking about when we're separating things. Okay, so anyway, how do we separate these two things? Basically, we're trying to deploy a bunch of times, and eventually release. So, okay, basically, there's a bunch of different ways that you can do it, but the biggest one, I'm sure a bunch of you will know, feature toggles are the way to do this. Okay, so for those that are unsure, this is a feature toggle. Okay, it's essentially just something wrapping our code, an if block that says if this new feature is on for some specific user, and this thing could be entirely broken underneath. Ideally, it's not, but the block allows us to test out this new feature without affecting other users. So with feature toggles, we can deploy our changes and they will be inactive, okay? So they won't affect our users. They can be slowly rolled out to certain users, and basically they allow features to be merged and built out without affecting other teams as well. So other teams working on the same component, in the same area, aren't affected by your work, okay? Your potentially broken new feature. The other dark side of this to toggles, some of you might have heard about the Knight Capital recently that basically forgot to clean up a particular toggle, and they reused the same toggle name, and it caused them to lose millions of dollars. So the critical part of using feature toggles is to clean them up afterwards. Okay, so my rule of thumb is basically once it's on and you've proven that it's not going to break, you then remove it, right? It sounds obvious, but it's something that it's often gets forgotten about. But once you turn it on, you remove it. Okay, maybe a week or whatever, but you remove it almost straight away. So in terms of the process, we might introduce a new feature with, if this new feature is on for some internal user, so we turn it on for internal users to begin with, and we can start building out this feature. So we add some more new shiny feature, maybe a bug fix, okay, because our users have been using it, our internal users. We've been dog fooding this particular feature, and we fix some bugs, okay. After that, we start turning it on for some specific set of customers, okay? And maybe we make a few more bug fixes, but we're only affecting a small subset of users. And then finally, we turn it on for everyone. Okay. As soon as that happens, we remove the code, remove the feature toggle, and everyone has the shiny new feature. So, okay, so that's about introducing new functionality. When we want to introduce, say, a new field or a new endpoint for our API, we use a technique called expand, rollout, contract. Okay, this allows us to make basically breaking changes in a considered manner. So expand, rollout, contract. I'll go through it in a sec. So some more code. Hopefully it's simple enough. But basically, we've got a user, they've got a name field, a surname field, and some usage of that field. So we think, well, actually, the name field really should be first name. Okay, we want to rename this field. So the first thing to do is we expand. Okay, so we add our first name field. No one really uses it. We've added the field. We deploy that to prod. And then we want to start, we've got this new field, we want to start using it. So we make a change. Everyone starts to use this field, okay? There might be, if it's an API, there might be multiple other APIs consuming this particular field, okay? Everyone updates to use this new field. We deploy to prod. After that, so that's rolling out your change, right? After that, you want to start to contract. So once you've proven that everyone has stopped using that particular field, you then contract and you remove the now defunct unused field. Okay, so this is a measured form of deprecating a particular field. So we remove our name field that's no longer used, and we go about our lives after deploying, right? So yeah, expand, rollout, contract. So this technique is really useful for API changes. Okay, it might be fields, might be endpoints, but it's also really useful for database changes. You can do the same thing, and like library changes. Library changes potentially a bit harder to track down usages, but yeah, if you can understand your users of your library, then this works just perfectly. Okay, obviously, always deploy to prod. So, given everything now, what does an ideal deploy process look like? So we've got automated tests and security scanning. We've got an automated deployment process, okay, and it's really quick to roll back, and really quick to get it back into a safe state when things go wrong. Our changes are toggled, so when we deploy them, they have no user impact initially until we're ready, okay, until our users are ready, until we've tested that feature and we're happy. And that means that we minimize the number of approvals required after you've merged your code. You can have as much process as you want before you merge your code, as much as you need, but ideally, after you've merged that code, it should be ready to go to production, and it's all automated. And our changes are backwards compatible. Okay, we're using expand, rollout, contract, or some feature toggling mechanism, and so we minimize the coordination that we need between teams because we're not breaking other people. And we're doing this all the time, so it's proven. And our deployment failures are rare. They happen, but we have a rollback procedure, and everything works smoothly. Okay, so deploying at speed is not a leap of faith. Okay, you don't just throw stuff into production and just cross your fingers and hope, right? It's having that safety removes the fear. Okay, and that safety allows us to deploy at speed. Thank you. So I assume we've got heaps of time for questions.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, thank you very much, Dylan. Now I'm going to open up the floor for a Q&A session. Has anyone got any questions for Dylan?
how do you prove?
Oh, we just got one down the back first, just for the mic.
I guess being sort of still new to developing or whatever, just wondering what these type of manual deployment processes kind of look like, if they're like that much of a pain.
What do manual deployment processes look like? I guess I don't know. It could look. It's different in every company. So I guess I'm thinking about maybe the old days where you're FTPing your files onto a PHP server or something, and then or like manually copying your WAR file onto a server that's like a pet server that you keep alive, specifically, and you don't create new ones all the time. Like it's not basically because that machine is set up by some person somewhere 5 years ago that has since left the company. So you're looking at setting up VMs via code, and basically all the pieces of infrastructure that you need are set up via code. That's the automated way. I know that's sort of very vague, but it is totally different in it depends what you're deploying.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah. Next question.
I guess this depends a lot on if we're talking about client side or server side. But how do you prove that, in your expand contract, for example, how do you prove that, say, a property of an external API, is...
Yeah, so I guess
internal, within an organisation, but...
So within an organisation, it's ideally much easier. There's plenty of tools out there. Ideally, your organisation's got some sort of code repository, and everyone can see that the usage of that code. You should be able to know the dependencies of each of the systems. So I guess I'm thinking about client libraries. So if you're talking between APIs, an API might output some sort of client library, and so know the people that depend on that client library, so you can check those usages. External is a much harder thing. It's essentially a library, right? So you have to deprecate fields and give comms to that, and wait a long time. that becomes a much harder deal. But internally, this stuff it shouldn't be hard. It is for all sorts of reasons, but it shouldn't be hard, and you can make great strides internally at least. I think, I don't know. I feel like that was super vague, but yeah, there's definitely tools out there.
Well, that was my question as well. There was a guy who was raising that hand first. Hey, Dylan. Is that working? Can you hear me?
No.
It's turned off. There we go.
Okay, there we go.
I was just going to expand on that question. So a few years ago, I had a bit of experience working with you, and
Here we go.
it was an awesome experience. But I love the expand, rollout, contract. But adding to that question, we experimented with consumer-driven contract testing.
Yeah.
But it never really seemed to take hold. It never really seemed to work. And I was just wondering, where did it land? Did you get it working, or did you find other ways to...
So I have seen other implementations that worked, but we ended up ripping it out and going for, as I was sort of talking about before, having a client. So each API would spit out a client library, and for either back-end services, so like Java, or front-end as well. And the key to that is also that, so we had a lot of issues early days where we would make backwards incompatible changes. So we would just sort of forget about consumers and break them, thinking that contract testing was going to help us. So we ended up writing, and there's plenty of tools out there that sort of check your Swagger and fail your build when you make backwards incompatible changes. That's not to say that you can't make them, but you have to do it in a measured way. So you don't make them unless you have sort of proven and sort of gone through all your, Git repos and checked that the other consumers are not using that field or that endpoint anymore. And that's usually just a case of a search. But yeah, first of all, you don't make those backwards incompatible changes, by default at least. Yep.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, about feature toggling. So I've seen feature toggling fail terribly. Thankfully, not because of me, but of some people. And I was a very fortunate spectator about it. So I've seen it fail many times, even though I was perfectly capable of doing so. Also, more projects. My question is that, do you think feature toggling is more of an engineering thing than a DevOps thingy?
So I have DevOps in my talk title, but I think the concept of having it. So first of all, I think the concept of having DevOps as a role or something feels like it's defeating the purpose of DevOps. But I guess I think I've lost track of what I was thinking. Ask your question again. Sorry.
Do you think it's more of a DevOps thing or an engineering thing?
Yeah. Okay. So that's, I guess my thought is it should. There's no distinction for me. Engineers are the whole point of DevOps is that you've just got smart people doing work, right? Ideally, right? So the point of DevOps is that you're bringing in all these people and working together. So I mean, maybe it's not one person, maybe it's one team, but distinguishing between actually having a specific role for DevOps doesn't make sense to me, because you're just a team of people working towards improving. Yeah, I don't,
Collective intelligence. Really,
yeah,
isn't it?
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah.
Got some more questions?
Yeah, hey Dylan. My question is also about feature toggling. So I've seen, teams losing track of the toggles, not cleaning up. Did you have any kind of tooling in place, or also you kind of present it to maybe the business and look, that's in production. Now we turn it on and then we clean it up, because let's say 4 teams, 20 components.
Yeah.
You might lose
Yeah. So that was a big thing for us. So at Bankwest we were using I would say internal tools for the feature toggles and also managing them. But we definitely had visibility of what toggles each team owned, how long they'd been turned on, the state of them in each of our environments. So we had full visibility, and I don't know, it seems silly, but if they got too old, they would go red, right? We would know that this thing is getting old. There was it has to be a conscious decision to keep that thing around, because it's in your face. That was all custom stuff, but tools like Launch Darkly and stuff, which are the popular ones in the outside world, they have all this stuff. You can see how old toggles are, and we basically wouldn't start work or wouldn't be able to deliver our new feature until we'd gotten rid of the old feature toggles. That's a bit of process, but you have to have that ability to something to audit, removing stuff. Otherwise, it just gets forgotten about.
Well done, Dylan. You can have the speed up in your deployment. But as a consumer of the database, I did a lot of analytic and machine learning. And in your example, you changed the field name. That will break my code. How you make my life easy as well?
Yeah, right. So I guess that's why you're taking the measured approach of not renaming. So there's no such thing as a rename, basically. There's an add and a remove, but it's a considered step. So in the case of, say, a database, you would be adding a column and populating both columns, okay? And no one's using that other column. You would migrate the data into that other column, maybe as a second step. Only once both columns are sort of working in tandem, then you can switch over to actually using that new column. So then that would be at the point that you would start to use that new column. And once we've proven that you're actually using it, and so is everyone else, then we can drop the other column. That would be the approach.
Thank you.
Hello. For testing, when do you use a load balancer and to divert some of your traffic to the new feature and roll it out slowly rather than use feature request?
So that's, to be honest, not something I have really ever tried. I'm sure it's a valid approach, but most of the stuff that I have done is more about you would deploy. So I guess that's more about like what's it called? Like basically shadowing requests to some sort of system before you take it and make it live.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't have experience personally. Most of the things I do is like you actually deploy the thing into production, and the code is inactive. So you're not really having two versions running at once. You're just switching over, and then you can control, turn on some toggle or some toggle for specific users. Yeah, it's more about that. That's easier to reason about in my head.
So I guess it's pretty much down to the concept that we're deploying with a high level of frequency, which implies to me that we're more prone to put bugs into the production environment, although I understand that's probably with a smaller user base.
Yep.
How do you rationalize that? Like, is it just subjective? Do you go, oh, well, these users are prepared to cop it, so it's okay, or what's going on there?
Yeah, okay. So I totally get that. So we're releasing more often, more likely that code is less ready and getting into the hands of our users, right? So the key thing is that ideally so with feature toggles, you're exposing less of your users. So you're maybe only exposing your team initially, right? And I know that's hard depending on your system, because depending on your system, your users are, like your team is not really able to dog food your app, right? Particularly in the case of Bankwest, where my team wasn't applying for a home loan every week. But we've got other environments where we do that, right? Where we might turn on in that particular environment, we might turn on just for my team until we're really happy. So we're not even affecting other teams, we're just affecting my team. Okay, the team that's actually building out that functionality. It's definitely a risk, but I would trade it off with the fact that if you're bulking up, 2 months of changes and sending that into production, and that breaks, well, what went wrong? 2 months of work. I have to sift through 2 months of work to figure out what the hell went wrong. That's going to take me much longer than, say, that one thing that I send into production.
I guess just to add to that, so it seems like it is kind of subjective. We haven't necessarily been able to quantify doing this way has less impact than doing the other way. It just seems that way because we're not as stressed in the large releases or deployments.
Yeah, but Yeah, I
Just
don't
not
have
It's
no
not
for sure.
about it necessarily. Yeah.
I don't have numbers, but I guess I guess I've definitely seen the alternative. So from my experience, I've seen deployments go wrong and go wrong catastrophically way more when you're deploying monthly or whatever.
Yes, it seems like the impact will be less with a higher frequency of deployment, even if there are more bugs, they're not as damaging, so maybe it's okay.
And it's way less stress as a developer,
Sure.
which ideally also in turn makes for less bugs. But for sure, I don't have numbers.
No, thanks.
Okay, last question.
Oh, great. So I work at a bank. I work for Up, which is now owned by Bendigo. So we ship 6 to 10 times a day, but Bendigo might ship once every few months. Were there any things you had to do to bring the other teams within the bank along this journey to allow you to ship multiple times a day and release more frequently? Thinking like risk teams and those kind of things.
So that's definitely that's definitely a hard one, right? And I think what made it possible, at least at Bankwest, was the setup of the team. So again, when these things arise, say for deployments, we brought in our system engineers into the team. So actually having, bringing the critical people on the par, critical expertise, bring them actually into our teams, even or our project sphere, whatever you want to call it. But actually bringing them in so their goals are your goals. It's not an easy problem for sure. There's a lot of different disciplines that need to be involved, but ideally where you can bring them in, and so you're both heading in that same direction. That's.
Is that something to do with your methodology as well, like being truly agile as well, and having that framework across the organisation to accept continuous development?
Yeah, I think that's all this stuff is a constant. You constantly hit up against these sort of problems, but also you're constantly trying to improve. And any organisation is not going to be homogenous, right? It's all different areas are going to be totally different and work in totally different ways. But I think if you can somehow align on what you're trying to achieve, that's how you get that done.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you very much, Dylan.
Cool.
It was a great presentation.